Plaza Chambery in Madrid on a sunny Sunday morning. This is one of the many plazas around Madrid city that people come and they enjoy in the city, have a coffee or children play in a local park. It's a great way to pass some time when you're here visiting the city. So I'm off now to have a coffee, a cafe con leche. Right, so off we go. See you soon.
Hello, you're listening to Right So, Off We Go, the podcast where you get the inside track on destinations worldwide. I'm Ailish Ford, and today we're off to Madrid, where I chat to Athlone woman Roisin O'Sullivan. During our conversation, she tells me about some of the lesser-known smaller museums I can visit.
And another one that's in close to the area where I live in Chamberí is one called Joaquín Soraya. He was a very famous artist from kind of the Valencia-Alicante region, and it's his house where he lived with his family. And when he died, his wife bequeathed it to the state, and it just his old house. And he designed the garden outside of it like an oasis in the middle of the city, and it's the most beautiful, like stately home, and it's very simple. You could be in and out in an hour.
Suggests a day trip I can take outside of the city.
Walt Disney originally based the Disney Castle around a few different castles in Europe, and one of those castles is actually the one in Segovia. And if you go to visit it, you can see similarities like the turrets and things like that. It's very sweet, and it's nice to see that, even if it's not true, but I think it is, that could have possibly come from there,
And tells me about an unusual treasure that makes a great photo.
One of the most interesting and hidden treasures of Madrid is an Egyptian temple called Temple of Dibod. And the best photo opportunity is at sunset. If you stay a little bit longer, you actually get to see it lit up at night, which is spectacular.
I started our chat by asking her how she came to Madrid and how she finds living there.
My background is in languages, and so I had spent a couple of months in Madrid way back when, during my gap year in uni. And I just got a great vibe and energy off the city. And so when I graduated university then in Dublin, I decided, prior to maybe doing anything permanent in Ireland, that I would actually move back to Madrid and just give it a go. I thought it could be, explore a few opportunities and see, what might happen. And I fell in love with the city. And I made my life here, and it's now become very much my home. It's just a fantastic way of life here, and it's not too far from Ireland, which always is good, for family and that. But it's one of the main reasons why I suppose I've stayed here so long. It's a great city to live in. It offers everything,
And how long are you living there now?
23 years, nearly 24. So long time.
Okay, so
yeah.
You're pretty much a native at this stage.
Yeah, I'm actually here longer than I ever was at home,
Yeah,
so,
which says a lot. What do you find is the main difference between living in Madrid and living in Ireland?
I suppose the obvious answer to that would be the weather. Madrid does get the seasons. It's one of the highest capitals in Europe, so we do get colder winters, mostly in January and February. And then we're, famous for our hot summers, but we do get a lovely spring and a lovely autumn. It offers you everything, but I suppose on the weather side, it's predominantly drier, bright blue, clear skies, for the good majority of the year, which makes it so much easier to plan. Whereas I suppose in Ireland, things are more weather dependent. Yes. And then, I think that's probably the main difference between the two. There's actually quite a lot of similarities, but quality of life here as well. They really, they work quite hard, but they love their downtime. It's very social. It's all based around your friends and your family. It's all about going out and enjoying yourself. So you can really have a great life here,
And Roisin, tell me, for someone listening who maybe is planning a trip and wants to get into the mood of Madrid before they actually go, are there any books that you've read that are set in Madrid that can maybe take you there in terms of the atmosphere?
I'm not an avid reader, so I haven't read that many books that would have maybe been based here. But I suppose one of the most famous writers that would have spent time here and has written some of his books based here would have been the Nobel winner, Ernest Hemingway. Over, I suppose, the course of 3 decades, he spent a lot of time here, first as a kind of a reporter post-Civil War, and some of he had a fascination with the city, and so some of the Spanish culture is featured a lot in his work, and Madrid is actually featured in a couple of his more famous books. the novel The Sun Also Rises, it actually ends with a scene in the dining room of the Botín, which is the world's oldest restaurant, and it's based here in Madrid in the centre. And then the famous Retiro Park and the Royal Botanical Gardens appear in For Whom the Bell Tolls. So there are other books, obviously, also that they have features of Madrid coming strongly through them. And actually part of, I suppose, the attraction with Ernest Hemingway is that tourists can actually still come and visit some of the establishments, like the hotels and museums that would have inspired the writer when he first came to Madrid. So that's always interesting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then what about film for people maybe who aren't really book people? Any films or TV programs that you think give a good sense of the city?
Yeah, one international film that springs to mind would be The Cold Light of Day, which stars Henry Cavill and Bruce Willis. Now it's kind of a few years ago now, I think 2012, around then. But it's actually filmed predominantly in Madrid. So there's a lot of scenes that are set and show the beauty of the centre, like the Plaza Mayor, the main square, Retiro Park again, Sol, which is right in the very centre, and actually the train station at Atocha, which has its own kind of botanical garden in it, So that's on kind of the international American style movie in English. And then there's so many Spanish movies that are set here and really show, I suppose, the culture of the Madrid, the city itself and the people. And I'd have to probably give special mention to the Spanish director Pedro Almodóvar, because he's filmed many movies over the decade. One that's probably most recent would be the one that he did called Pain and Glory, which is stars Antonio Banderas and Penélope Cruz. And he uses the Cine d'Or. And it was an old cinema, basically. It's a contemporary small cinema that portrays the culture of Spain, and it's in the neighbourhood of Lavapiés, and that's one of Almodóvar's favourite locations to film whenever he's in Madrid. And he's constantly found inspiration in Madrid and kind of relies on its terms, for his movies, which is really lovely. So any Spanish-speaking visitors that want to give it a look, they could.
Okay. And then what about music, Roisin? Is there any music that defines it as a place, do you think?
For me, I moved over in the early 2000s, but I know kind of from all of the Spanish friends that I have here that the 80s was a huge kind of movement culturally for Madrid. There's what's called La Movida Madrileña, which is known as La Movida, and it was like a countercultural movement that took place mainly in Madrid at the start of the 80s. And it was like the transition for Spain to democracy after the death of Franco, the dictator, in 1975. So the movement kind of coincided with economic growth in Spain, and then it featured a kind of a rise in punk rock and synth pop music. So, and it really influenced everything. So from, the city street fashion, photography, cartoons, it was all bright colours, voluminous hair, unconventional and revealing clothing. It was really, I suppose, an awakening. The Spanish people, having lived in dictatorship for those years, it was really their movement to come out of it. It was also, kind of an openness regarding sexual expression, and I suppose, an emergent LGBTQ community came out of it. And it really started in Madrid. So for me, kind of music-wise, what would define it would be that La Movida, that movement in the 80s. And then from Madrid, it actually kind of pushed forward to other cities. So Barcelona, Bilbao, Vigo, they all followed suit then afterwards.
Ah, okay. You talked a little bit there about the Franco era, but talk to me a bit about its history. Now, I know a city like Madrid is going to have a very rich history, but are there any stories from its past that interest you?
I suppose its roots trace back to kind of prehistoric times, So the city has a history of over 2,000 years. We'd be here a long time on the podcast if we were to talk about them all. But you really see, I suppose, the Muslim influence of it from way back when. I think one of the first constructions here would have been in 1865 AC, and that was by Emir Muhammad I, and it was kind of an establishment of a fortress on the banks of the Manzanares River. So it really, the first settlers and that back in Madrid go back to that date. One thing that springs to mind for me also is that Madrid was actually not the original capital of Spain. And I don't think very many people know that.
No, I certainly didn't know that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Toledo was the capital up until 1560. And King Felipe II was in reign at that time, and he understood the importance of the city of Madrid, and he decided at that time to make it the capital. So he moved his court there. He kind of solidified the centre as a kind of a centre of the royal power. And then everything kind of, from therein then was, he was the driving force behind the construction and the development of Madrid as a city. And like really, Toledo and Madrid are only about an hour away, in distance-wise by car. But that happened back in 1560. So it's an interesting fact that not many people would know.
Absolutely. And then, Roisin, what about the people? I know I always find that it's the people often that make a place. Any stories of your encounters with them?
They're so warm and friendly. I really feel that they're quite like ourselves in Ireland. I think that's why there's always been so many synergies between Ireland and Spain over the years. They're really family orientated. They love a good party. They love having the crack. Going out late nights, it's really easy to adapt well to this city. And stories of encounters, how long have you got? But but just even the opportunities, you could, I bumped into Rafa Nadal at a kiosk in an airport one time. He springs to mind just because he's announced his retirement there at the weekend. We've met royalty at different events in work. We've got, but there's always a warm and friendly feeling to them. So even people of maybe of kind of a celebrity or a famous stature, you can still get an hola and they'd still make time to speak to you. So that's quite nice,
Oh, that is lovely. And I know I've always found it too, anytime I'm in Spain, generally, the people do seem to be very friendly. And as you say, a bit like the Irish in that sense.
Yeah.
So you mentioned bumping into Rafa Nadal there. Are there any other famous people who call it home?
Well, I also mentioned Ernest Hemingway. I suppose he had spent quite a lot of time here before in the past. But famous people that called it home, a few people have come because of Spanish partners. So one that springs to mind is Viggo Mortensen. So the actor from The Lord of the Rings, he lived in Madrid for what possibly still does. They have a home here, I know, with his Spanish wife. And then Sade, the singer from the 80s. Yes. She fell in love and married a Spanish film director by the name of Carlos Pliego in the late 80s. And they relocated from London to Madrid as a consequence of that. And she was here for quite a few years and actually had her children here. And then I suppose since, moved back. But she was another one that called Madrid home for a while.
Oh, okay. And then, Roisin, what about food? Because it's such a part of a place's culture, isn't it? Any typical Madrid dishes I should try next time I'm there?
Yeah, Madrid does have its own gastronomy. I mean, you can get a taste of all of Spain from here, I suppose. There's always the restaurants with all types of food in it. But classic recipes from Madrid would probably be, it sounds a bit strange now, but like stews or, squid sandwiches, and then there's different kind of tapas dishes. Some to mention, there's cocido madrileño, which is basically a Madrid stew, and it's very popular with the locals. It's actually something that's made quite often at home by, your grandmother would have had a recipe for it and all the rest. And it's a stew that's made with like legumes and chicken. But then others can add bacon, or, you could you could stuff in a bit of an egg there or mincemeat. It's a bit of a mix of stuff. It was probably whatever you had in your cupboard and you put it all together. Another stew type, they were into the stews really big time, but another stew would be, it's called callos madrileños. And callos are it's like tripe. So it's a tripe dish that's stewed slowly for a couple of hours. Over a low heat, and it was traditionally with pig or cow, but now kind of modern versions of it have it with lamb or cod. You could also have it with serrano ham or morcilla, which is a type of pudding, black pudding, and so it just sautéed over on a low heat. So that's another one. And then very, very famous, and I couldn't go past it without mentioning it, would be the bocadillo de calamares. And calamare, most people will know, obviously, are the squid rings, but this is a calamari roll, and it's a must try when you're visiting Madrid. There's actually specific tapas bars just serving that and nothing else. Okay. So it consists of a bread roll that's filled with the squid rings. and it's they're coated in flour and they're deep fried in the olive oil, and it's really explosive tastes in your mouth. And it's a perfect one if you're going out for, you know, drinks with friends, just to stop by one of the tapas bars and grab one along the way. And also, all of these dishes really, Eilish, they could be easily made at home by anybody. So if anybody was coming and visiting, and you wanted to try something when you go back home, any one of the stews, you know, there's loads of recipes online. And I mean, a calamari roll, just a couple of squid rings and a baguette, you know. I'm always thinking, some of my friends over the years have asked, you know, in those kind of come dine with me evenings back at home, you know, you could even serve up a simple Spanish tapas plate or a charcuterie board, and you'd be the envy of all your friends and family for sure.
Wow, there's a great tip. And Roisin, is there a particular time of year that you think is best to visit Madrid?
You can come all year round, really, but for me, May and September would be my favourite months. It's just that sweet spot temperature-wise. July and August can be very, very hot, obviously, and it's the centre of the country, so we're quite landlocked. Like, there's no seaside escape, you know. So for me, May and September, it's you know, lovely and balmy. It's warm enough that you don't have to have like big, heavy coats on you, and you can walk around. The weather is, you know, predominantly really good around those time, but it's just you're avoiding that kind of that really intense heat of the summer. So for me, they would be the best months to come and visit.
Okay, now Roisin, what would your sort of perfect day in the city look like? How would you spend it? What do you think are the must-sees and do's?
For me, if you only had one day, and I've done it myself in other cities around the world, you'd really the hop on and hop off buses, you know. It's a fun and popular way to get around a city. You have direct stops at all of the main sites, and they normally include like an interactive guide. For me, what I would normally do on those is actually stay on it for the hour that it brings you around first thing, and then that lets you kind of situate yourself, and you can see which one, you know, some attractions, you even just seeing them from the outside can be enough for people, and then you could really decide which ones you might actually want to go and visit and spend a bit of time on. Really, for one day, you'd probably want to focus more on the centre so that you could get Gran Via, which is the big shopping, big main avenue in the centre, and then all the shopping streets that are off that, Fuencarral, Hortaleza, down to Sol, which is in the centre. And then from Sol, you can go on a little bit and you would get, say, Plaza Mayor, which is the big square. So, you know, you get a lot of history from that. And you can walk on down, and it's easy to get around, you know, in a kind of in a square, but you could get to see the Royal Palace, the Opera Building, all from, say, the outside if you didn't have that much time. And then, you know, stop for somewhere lovely to have your Spanish lunch, your tapas, or whatever it might be. You've got time for a little bit of sightseeing, a little bit of shopping, lovely Spanish lunch, and, you know, you would have seen all of the main sites on that hop-on bus. So I think it's a really good way of seeing as much of the city as you could in one day.
And get yourself orientated, I guess.
Exactly, yeah. Really, it would depend on the day. There's specific days that, you know, to go to different things. But I think for me, you know, in around the centre, Mercado San Miguel is a 100-year-old market that was re-engineered as a kind of a food hall hub, and it's really lovely to spend some time there. You kind of base yourself in the middle of the market, and then somebody goes and gets like a plate of jamón, and somebody goes and gets croquetas, and somebody gets a really lovely wine. You could lose yourself in there for a couple of hours tasting all of the beautiful food. A really lovely stroll in and around all the old quarter. Another favourite of mine is also Retiro Park. It's just beautiful. You're out in the fresh air. It's, you know, it'd be a cross between, say, St. Stephen's Green and Phoenix Park at home. It's just one of these lovely big parks, green areas, you know, and it's nice sometimes when you're in a city with a lot of kind of concrete buildings around you, it's nice to get into a little bit of green. So, and just hang out, you know, really just make an opportunity to meet in a lovely plaza, in a lovely square with your friends and have kind of late afternoon tapas. So there's loads to do.
And then are there any sites that you'd skip? You know, anything that gets a lot of recommendations, but that you think really isn't that great?
I think one of the big things is, I suppose, the queues outside, long queues outside of different big, you know, popular sites. So for me, I always say to people, you really have to be honest with what you're interested in. Like if you're not interested in museums or art at all, then there's no point in you queuing for an hour or 2 hours outside of the Prado and then spending 3 hours inside of it if really art isn't what you're interested in. So
Yeah.
I think for me, it's not about, I couldn't necessarily pick one that I would skip. I always base it on what the preference is that people like to visit. So, or you would go at off-peak times or something, But that's a big one for me. Long queues, especially if you've only got a short amount of time, even buying tickets beforehand, which can help. You still end up queuing. So you just have to be very mindful when you come on a visit anywhere, if you were spending like a few days, to really be clear on what you want to see. Because I think the long queues for museums is one that a lot of people do just to tick a box, and it's not really of interest to them. So that would be one that you might skip,
And then, Roisin, if you had 3 days, what would you add to what you described there as a sort of a perfect day?
Well, I had mentioned, I suppose, the Retiro Park is one of the only, it has one of the only devil statues in it. I know that sounds really strange, but it's one of the places that you could actually go and visit something really unique. So if you had a bit of time that you could spend like quite a good portion, like half a day, maybe in Retiro Park, it was a statue erected, dedicated to Lucifer, the fallen angel, and it's apparently it's the only statue dedicated to the devil in the world. So that's an interesting one to see. So I would probably spend a lot of time in maybe Retiro. You could easily be there for half a day. They've got a beautiful big lake. They've got some really impressive buildings. One is like a kind of a glass palace where they would do exhibitions and things. So, your one day you would have your shopping time in the centre. You would visit some of your more kind of monumental, big tourist attractions, say the museums, for example. If it was your preference, it has some of, such a large range of museums. There's the Prado, the Thyssen, the Reina Sofia. They're actually known as the Golden Triangle because they're quite near to each other. So you could spend some time doing that. I think if you also had more time, if you had the full 3 days, there's interesting things like a walking tour or a tapas tour. I've done that even myself, and I live in the city. But the tapas tours, because it can actually bring you around to places that you might not have heard of, or to try interesting, new flavors or new foods. Also, I think kind of at nighttime, if you could add in maybe, a flamenco show. I've often brought friends, for example, to dance classes, to flamenco dance classes, if you had that third day. Yeah. Or there's a lovely place, that you can have painting with a glass of wine. So if you had extra evenings here, you could definitely do some of those type of activities, which I think is good. Part of the tapas tours as well, I also know that they do cookery classes. So if you wanted to learn how to make a paella, or you wanted to learn how to make even one of the Madrid stews, you'd be able to do that. So I think 3 days is probably a perfect amount of time, because it would give you enough time to do all of the proper sightseeing. So the museums and the Royal Palace. It has a most amazing armory section with all of the old weaponry. It's really one to see. The Mercado San Miguel, which I happened to mention, it's another one that you could add in. And then the Retiro, and then maybe get in a show or do a tapas tour. There's things like that. You could really fill it up. But yeah.
And it's a nice compact city, actually, really, isn't it, in terms of those sites? So it is very doable.
Very doable. Yeah, very doable. It's all, most things are within walking distance from each other, and you can separate them. So if you needed to go to different sections of the city, you could do one day and one the next and one on the third.
Yes.
So yeah, definitely.
Okay, now, Roisin, we love hidden gems on this podcast. I think you've given us a couple already, but what would you say would be your 3 top picks of things to see or do that you won't always find in a guidebook?
Some of the smaller, more intimate museums, I think, are a big shout out for me. You have your big 3 or whatever that I just mentioned, but there's 3 that come to mind. One is the Naval Museum, which is super interesting, because obviously think back on our own history classes in school, like the Spanish Navy, the Spanish boats, they discovered, and Christopher Columbus and all the rest, So there's a huge history there, and the Naval Museum I found super interesting. There's a museum dedicated to Madrid, which is, they're smaller, they're more intimate, and you can actually do them within an hour, So you can fit in something cultural, but you don't have to spend all day or queue largely for it. And another one that's in close to the area where I live in Chamberí is one called Joaquin Soraya. And it's his house where he lived with his family. And when he died, his wife bequeathed it to the state. He was a very famous artist from kind of the Valencia, Alicante region. And just his old house. And he designed the garden outside of it like an oasis in the middle of the city. And it's the most beautiful, like stately home. And it's very simple. You could be in and out in an hour, but you really feel that you've actually kind of, experienced some culture. So there are things that aren't always called out in guidebooks. Another thing for me would be, if I could mention one more, there's a walled vertical garden. It's called the Caixa Forum, and it was designed by a French botanist. And it's like, I think it's 78 foot tall, and it's got 250 different species of plants that survive without soil. So it's all to do with the light and the thing. And it really gives an appearance of like a living piece of art. It's something that's not always called out, or if it is, it's kind of in the back of a book and it's not really. So that's something and it's very simple. It's, even on your way from, down visiting the museums, it's actually in that area. So it's something that you can come across. Yeah, it's easy to get to too, but it's quite pretty and it's just quite unusual, and I think it's one to mention.
Oh no, that sounds like a great one. And then if you had time to go on a day excursion outside of the city, where would you go?
There's two possible locations for that. So Toledo, which I'd already mentioned, which was the original capital, and it's famous for its steel factories. So it would have made all of the steel, all of the swords that the Spanish armies would have used centuries ago. And another one for me is Segovia. So they're both within an hour and a half distance of Madrid. Very accessible by trains. There's even a fast train that gets to Segovia, so you can even get there within an hour. And Segovia has this most amazing aqueduct. It's absolutely impressive. They're also famous for their suckling pigs. So there's different restaurants that you can go to that you can try that. And they serve it up to you in a very unique way. I don't want to say too much because it would spoil the surprise for anybody that goes. But it's really one to experience. And then a really cute note or fact about Segovia that I've been told, I like to believe it. I'm a bit of a Disney fan, but Walt Disney originally based the Disney Castle around a few different castles in Europe, obviously because historically that's kind of where the majority of the beautiful, most historic castles were. And one of those castles is actually the one in Segovia. And if you go to visit it, you can see similarities like the turrets and things like that. It's just, it's very sweet, and it's nice to see that, even if it's not true, but I think it is, yes, that could have possibly come from there,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So now we're on to our quickfire round. So, Roisin, best way to get around?
Walk, without a doubt. And if not, the metro. It's great infrastructure to get around Madrid.
Okay. Best area to stay?
Slightly off-centre, so anything maybe just outside of Sol or Gran Via. Chamberí is a really safe and good area. Anything in around that, so you're not stuck in the middle of it, but you are close enough that you're only maybe a 15-20 minute walk away.
Okay. Best place for a coffee?
I'm not a coffee drinker, but I've met enough friends for coffee over the years. So an area in the centre called Malasaña, it's like a mecca for coffee shops. You have all different types of specialty coffees there. So you have really famous ones like Toma Café, Pan y Pepillo, La Bicicleta. So anywhere in and around that area, there's just really quaint and cute little coffee shops.
Oh, great. Best place for a drink?
During the summer months, I'd have to say the rooftop terraces. You could get them on any hotels. One that I really love is the Circulo de Bellas Artes, which is the fine arts kind of building and museum. It's right in the centre of the city, and it just gives you most spectacular views. It's a great spot for a drink. And then outside of that, two key areas, I suppose, for nightlife or drink would be La Latina in the south, and then Ponzano. It's like one main street, and it's just bar and restaurant, but it's a great vibe. It's great nightlife. There's always a load of people around.
Oh, fabulous. And your favourite restaurant?
This is a hard one to answer because I've been here for so long. It probably has changed, Ailish, if I was to tell the truth. I probably had a favourite when I was here first, and then little by little it's changed. But one, I'd say if I was to pick out one tapas bar, actually, that that I go to quite often, and I bring everybody that comes to visit there, is one called Alhambra. And it was designed to look like a bar from the early 1900s. Like when you walk into it, you're kind of going, oh my God, this is like, stuck back in back beyond time. But it has lovely Moorish touches to it, but it's their selection of Andalusian tapas. The cured meats, the chorizos, the beer, the wine, it's all so tasty. So yeah, that would be one for me as a kind of a restaurant tapas bar would be Alhambra.
Oh, yeah, sounds great. And then for anyone who loves that Instagram picture when they're away, where do you think is the best place to take a photo?
One of the most interesting and hidden treasures of Madrid is an Egyptian temple called Temple of Debod. And the best photo opportunity is at sunset. So just to give you a bit of background, the construction of it is actually originally from Egypt. It was built, I think, in the 2nd century BC, and it was given to Spain as a gift from Egypt. So it arrived into Madrid in 1968, and it's very close to Plaza de España in La Montaña Park, and it's one of the few sites where you can actually view a complete set of ancient Egyptian ruins. It's very strange outside of Egypt itself, and the monument is surrounded by beautiful gardens and a fountain, but sunset is one of the best times to go and visit it. And then if you stay a little bit longer, you actually get to see it lit up at night, which is spectacular. But it's just the splendor of the beautifully lit sky in the background, breathtaking. So if you were looking for your Insta pic, that would be one to go and visit.
Okay, that sounds good. Best art or architecture experience?
I think just the look and feel of Madrid itself. I mean, it possesses a modern infrastructure, but it's really held on and preserved so well, the look and feel of all of those historic neighborhoods. And you can get all different types of Baroque and Romantic and different styles of architecture in it. I think one of the key things for me, as opposed to one in general, is just walk around the city and look up. Anything from first floor upwards, you're just going to be agog, because it's, even in the centre in Gran Via, you have all of those beautiful buildings lining the streets. The Royal Palace, Cibeles, which is the old, it's by Banco de España, and it's actually the equivalent of the GPO, our General Post Office, so the one that we would have in Dublin. But you see this building and it's absolutely breathtaking. So that's huge. That for me, those type of real old architectural buildings, and Madrid has just preserved them so well. They're really worth a visit.
Best nighttime entertainment, Roisin?
Well, if you were in La Latina or Ponzano, any of those kind of late night areas for drinks and dinner, there's just so much fun, and especially with the warmer weather, people are out in the streets and they're moving around. Another nighttime entertainment, I love to go and see a show. So just off Gran Via, on the lower part of it, it's, you have a lot of theatres, so you'd get a lot of musicals, you would get a lot of shows there. A flamenco show is a great one to see as well. My favourite would be in the summer, they have Noches de Botánico, which is like a summer music outdoor festival, and it's the most intimate concert setting. And it's run kind of, I think, for the 3 months of the summer, June, July and August, but you get all of the big acts coming to it, but it's so intimate, and they have it all built around with like food stalls and places to drink and eat. So that's a really great nighttime entertainment if you were looking for something different.
And then what about sports? Best local sports experience?
Well, football central. I mean, Spain is just such a football country, really. So you do get caught up and swept up in the whole lot when you're here, whether you like it or not. Thankfully, I do like soccer. So it's a win for me. You have the choice of, you have Real Madrid, you have Atletico Madrid. You could, if you're lucky enough to go and see a match, the experience of watching a Real Madrid match in the Bernabeu, like it is second to none. They have an amazing museum as well. But if you weren't particularly maybe like soccer mad, Madrid also do a really good tennis open. So, you get all of the greats. I mean, I mentioned Nadal already, but I've actually seen him play quite a few times. But you get all the greats that come to it as well. And it's a nicer one. You don't always get to go to the Wimbledons of this world and to the bigger opens. But Madrid actually have quite a decent one. And there really is something for everyone, because there's huge investment in the country into sports. So there's fantastic facilities and arenas you can visit.
Okay, that sounds great. So what would you say has been your worst experience in Madrid? Or is there anything that visitors should be wary of, Roisin?
Well, when you're visiting any major city, I suppose pickpockets. are kind of a key thing to watch out for. There's, Spain, I think, gets something like 80 or 90 million visitors a year. So between Barcelona and Madrid, it's quite a few visitors. Pickpockets would probably be the main thing in the area, but most people, would have their senses about them and would know to be careful. But, they've clever ways of kind of trying to distract you. So that would be the only thing. But really, Madrid is quite a safe city. So it would only be the odd time and maybe in one of those packed kind of central areas, just to keep it in mind.
Okay. And if you had room in your suitcase, what should you buy to bring home? Because it is a great city for shopping, isn't it?
Fantastic city for shopping, but I suppose if you were looking for something very Spanish, I suppose the beautiful Spanish wines that you could get. But for me, it would probably be, the charcuterie cold meats that they have, like chorizo. It would be probably the first thing that I would put into my suitcase. The manchego cheese, for example, maybe a bottle of beautiful olive oil. It could be as a present or for yourself, or a present for yourself,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. And Roisin, if you had to leave Madrid, what would you miss?
Everything. The weather, the quality of life, the life-work balance, outdoor lifestyle. There's always something happening. There's activities for everyone's tastes. Just think I would miss just the lifestyle in general, really. And that the kind of guarantee that you're more or less going to get good weather throughout the year. That's a blessing.
Absolutely. And final question, where would the next best place to Madrid be?
Well, for me, because I've made it my home, so Ireland.
Okay.
But two other cities that I would have visited over the time that I definitely would have said at some point I would go back. Siena was one that in Italy, it was just so stunning. I'd love to go back. There was bits that I didn't see. And then one for me that really stood out was New Orleans. The music, the lifestyle, you've all the different French and Spanish influences over the years. There was just something about that city that really captured me. So it's one that I would definitely go and visit again, and I would recommend to anybody.
Roisin, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you about Madrid. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you, Ailish, and can't wait to have you visit sometime soon.
I hope you enjoyed my chat with Roisin. I don't know about you, but I'm already planning my next trip to Madrid to check out some of those great recommendations. Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love if you'd press follow and recommend it to a friend. I hope you'll join me next time.